Well, thank you everybody for joining us today for the very first kickoff meeting of our CGSA support series, hosted by CIE, the Center for Innovation in Education. It's April 2nd. And we plan to have these as a part of a series that people can jump into and ride along and hopefully get support that they need to complete a rigorously thought out, but also thoughtfully co-created CGSA application in response to the US DOE's RFP that came out a couple of weeks ago. Let's move forward into the next slide. So we'll talk a little bit today about just the agenda and give a quick overview. We are recording this for those who aren't able to join, knowing that we announced this series in response to the sort of release of CGSA and recognizing that the timetable is very quick. So people may not have had time to clear their schedules. And so we will be recording it for those who can't join us. But today's agenda is first to start off with welcome and introductions. And then we really want to imbue this moment with a sense of possibility of what CGSA could do. And so we'll get grounded in that first. And then we'll talk about how to initiate the process of applying, really starting with drafting a project plan, completing the notice of intent to apply, and then really constructing a team that will be able to co-create the application. And then we'll end off with thoughts, questions, and hopes about CGSA. Again, just sort of grounding in that sense of possibility for what this moment could be. All right, next slide. And just so that we are starting to build community as a working group and as a support group for each other, we thought we would start off with a name and the organization that you're coming from, and then what excites you about this round of CGSA. So in order to give people a chance to think about responses to this, I'll start and then I'll kick it over to somebody. And don't worry, if you forget to pass it to somebody, I'll pass it for you. So first, my name is Donnie Tran and I work at the Center for Innovation in Education. And I am excited about this round of CGSA because of its direct tie to IADA. The second absolute priority. It feels like a really important moment to be taking advantage of at this time. And I will kick it over to Jenny Poon from CIE.
Hi, Jenny Poon from CIE. I am excited about this round of CGSA also because of the explicit ties to accountability innovation, but also in general, it feels like the way the application has been written really sits in a moment of increased federal willingness to think differently than they have in the past, and that's exciting.
All right, I'll kick it over to Angela.
Hi, I'm Angela Landrum. I'm at the Colorado Department of Education, and I think that what excites me about this round of CGSA from what I've seen is that there's just this willingness for DOE to help states that are already in a place where they've done some really good, interesting work to build upon that, support them by providing some funding so they can scale. So I think that's really exciting.
Cool. Thanks, Angela.
I'll kick it to Gretchen. There we go.
Thanks, Angela. Hi, everybody. I'm Gretchen with CIE. And similarly, I'm just excited about the department sort of casting a bigger net, and welcoming a broader set of ideas from the field. I think that's important because there are good ideas out there, like you said, Angela, that have started and are underway and are ready to be supported. I also think it's exciting because when a department does something like that, when they ask for information from the field, it means they're in a learning stance themselves, which I think is also exciting. It's great to see a department behave that way. It means there's other possibilities maybe in the future. And I will pass it to Paul.
Hi, I'm Paul. I'm another partner at the Center for CIE. What I'm excited about is that in the last round, a couple of years ago, there were two awards, Kentucky and New York, that were truly innovative and engaged in building assessment literacy and accountability from the ground up. And that seemed to be a real game changer, looking all the way back to the beginning of the century, when No Child Left Behind passed. And now we have an opportunity, with all of the things that folks have already shared, for this to happen, for this to grow and have more proof points. I think if there are more proof points, change truly could happen across the country. And I will pass it to Malachi.
Hey everybody, Malachi Nichols with Ford, Arkansas. Our organization is actually not planning to apply. So I think we're just excited to just learn about the process for when we do have the supports and kind of thoughts and systems and structures built that we can be ready for it in the future. So that's why I'm excited.
We'll keep it in the Arkansas family. Go to Denise.
Denise Arola with the Office of Innovation for Education, and I'm excited to see Malachi on because, there might just be some integrations that could happen via this as well, since you guys have a lot of really great work going on in Arkansas as well. I am kind of like the rest of you. I'm so excited that the feds were responsive to the feedback they've gotten on IADA. And I've had so much fun learning and some of the other CGSA grants that we've participated in, that it's just an exciting way to answer really important questions and learn along the way. So CGSA is just a neat opportunity if we can manage to make it work in the timeline. And I will pass it to Jason.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jason with CIE. Relatively new to CIE, so I think what I'm most excited about is hearing about all of your ideas for CGSA and seeing these applications come together. And I will pass it to Rita.
Thanks, Jason. Hi, I'm Rita. I'm with CIE as well. I'm excited to be here. And I think it's hard to be at the end because I think many of you have said many of the reasons that I'm excited about CGSA, including responsiveness, the things that folks are working on already, and the possibilities that come from it. So I'm excited about specifically this learning group and session so that we can continue to learn together as folks do apply and sort of refine things. So thanks. And Sean, I don't know if you're with us, but if you would like, welcome, and I will pass it to you. And if not, I'll pass it back to Donnie.
Cool. All right. Thanks. Appreciate it. So Sean, feel free to pipe in if you can hear us and want to introduce yourself. Otherwise, it's awesome to be here in community with all of you. The CIE team is really excited about this. I mean, Malachi, I think you captured it really well, that this is a moment, and regardless of our intentions around CGSA, it's a really cool opportunity to learn together. So we're excited that this community is launching, and thanks for introducing ourselves. Next slide, please. So as we noted, we want to really imbue this moment with a sense of possibility. I think we all feel it, just connecting about the things that are bringing us here and the value and the sort of import that we see CGSA kind of having right now. We want not only to sort of for ourselves to feel that, but we also want to be able to communicate that to the people that we talk to and engage in the process of building our CGSA application. And so we wanted to just take a moment to just reflect and consider, CGSA is really resources. And I think resources in a sense are hope, right? They're a sense of what can be done when we apply resources, time and energy and focus. And so, I just want to give people a chance to silently reflect on these three questions, and then we'll share out. What possibilities would CGSA enable in your system? What is the framing that would be of value to members of your community? And what about CGSA could get people excited in your system? So in a sense, we're asking you to sort of think for a moment about what the elevator pitch for CGSA is in a sense in your community. What's the thing that would kind of light people's hair on fire a little bit about it? Leading with the idea that it's a big federal grant that's going to be really hard to write And we'll have a lot of reporting requirements on the back end. Is not exactly like the inspirational pitch that we may imagine it being. And so we're trying to think of what is the actual like quick hit, exciting pitch that you might be starting to bubble up for you. So give people a second to just maybe reflect on those 3 questions. All right. So Angela, Denise, Malachi, Sean, what's the, and I'm thinking about this too in the context of Georgia as well, because we are still cultivating some discussions with the DOE around this. So I'm not absent with this conversation as well. So anything coming up for you? This doesn't need to be fully formed. This is a learning space. The vulnerability here is totally fine. Angela, what are you thinking?
Yeah, so in Colorado, I think we'd like the opportunity to do some scaling of some of the work that we've done. We've done a lot of coalition of the willing in pockets to the extent that we have the capacity of the department and with our partners. And I think from a framing standpoint, you know, the fact that that CGSA could offer system support for truly student-centered assessment and accountability systems. I mean, we'd have to make that in more community-friendly words, but I think the point is that and it kind of goes into that second one about, or the last bullet around what would get people excited, and this is the recognition that there's a value, or people, you know, at the state level and a federal level are really valuing the development of local assessment systems for use in high stakes decision making for students.
That's awesome. Thank you for that.
I've just been thinking about how, Paul, I go back to NCLB and all the horrible habits that everybody got into as a result of the connection between summative assessment and accountability. And I feel like in Arkansas, we've had moments of time where we've tried to kind of turn that big ship around, but it's like one of those it's like one of those giant container ships in the Suez Canal when the water level is low. And I feel like the water level has risen. We have this perfect opportunity. There's this new assessment system that is in the process of coming out, and it would be an excellent time to support the state agency's desire for a more comprehensive approach to teaching and learning that right sizes assessment as a tool for learning first and foremost, and then summative assessment as a check on those efforts. And we've talked about it for years, but there's just never a catalyst that brings it together. There's always these other fires that take precedence over a larger opportunity to really structure that intentionally. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from, is how do we put local learning systems at the forefront to inform a structure that can then be scaled in other places across the state, and specifically addresses that right sizing, and in doing so, hopefully can really change the way we think about assessment and how we're using it to really improve learning for students.
I love that. So I'm going to try out a sense of possibility pitch here for Georgia. I was working on this yesterday. So we want to develop innovative assessments that measure student attainment of competencies related to community and career connected learning. These competencies and assessments have to be locally developed because they must be aligned to local needs and local learning opportunities. And that we're also going to use the funding to develop the capacity to build really high quality career and community connected learning experiences. So it's the kind of like the learning experiences plus the assessments of them at the local level. All right. So there we did. We had a little like elevator pitch opportunity. Jenny, what are you thinking?
Yeah, I just wanted to add one. We were having some conversations with another state about this, and about how do they like advance the conversation within the SEA. And I think one of the things that resonated the most was that CGSA provides an opportunity, like with funding, to advance systems change with the field, not systems change, then push it on the field and hope that they're gonna implement well, but advance it together, build capacity among local educators along the way, as well as learning from their really embedded on the ground work to improve systems design, the overall systems design. So it's that hand in hand with the field that is resonating.
I love that. And I think in the Georgia context, we're also thinking that we're being careful to frame it as we're not replacing the existing system.
Right.
We're supplementing it and creating a complementary system that measures things that are important locally, and so that balanced system narrative. I appreciate that a lot, Jenny. Thank you. Cool. Okay. Well, we got a lot of good energy here. Denise, you want to say you're mad?
I was just saying, like I just wrote something that Jenny wrote. To me, it's activating local capacity as well as building it to improve systems and system design. So just thinking about that with the field, not to the field, that was always one of our big things is we don't do this to you, we do it with you because it's really about you. So I love that. Love the language.
When I love the thread of connection between the ways that we're thinking about it. So Angela, I heard like scaling, building capacity thread weaves through all of ours with the field, not to the field. These seem like real places of interconnection between the members of this learning community, which warms my heart. That's really great. Awesome. So let's get into the nitty-gritty of it, since we know that we have a lot of philosophical alignment. So the things that we know are coming down the pike, and just want to acknowledge, like, New York was so helpful. I know that they may be listening or may be listening to this recording later, in helping us think through their approach, and sharing their approach as an innovative way of getting at a project plan and getting to an application, a completed application. But just sharing a few dates that are coming up that are key, and starting to think through what this timeline could possibly be for us. So the notice of intent to apply is April 8th. That is next week. And just to note that that is not binding in either direction. So if you submit an intent to apply, it does not bind you to applying. And if you do not submit an intent to apply, it does not prevent you from applying. So it is just so that they can recruit the right number and type of reviewers. So take it as a good benchmark to try to aim for, but don't consider it as like a go, no go moment either. So the application close date and submission date is May 22nd. And so, that's really the goal line, and keeping that in mind. And so what we would love to prompt people to think through with this next phase of this conversation is, what are the key steps and deadlines for both composing a team, or not both, for composing a team, writing, reviewing, and then getting the right internal and sometimes external approvals and support letters. And so we're going to talk through that right now. We're going to provide a little example and template. So on the next slide, we took something that we created for Kentucky some time ago and anonymized it and put it into a format that could be shared with all of you. And I'm putting it in the chat. You can also scan it with your phones if that's easier for you. And if we could open it up, I'm just going to talk through it. You might be in it now. I see a lot of anonymous animals kind of jumping in, which is great. So we have a little preamble here. This is just for context. This is an example of what we created for Kentucky's 2022 proposal process. Adapt it, and it goes with the timeline that was true then, right? So the submission dates and deadlines were for that time. So don't take those as gospel, because we are starting in a different moment here. It's April 2nd as opposed to mid-March. And the deadline is later here in our context in 2024 than it was in 2022. We lay out some acronyms just so that you know a little bit of context about who was writing and who was a part of this. We had the benefit in Kentucky of having a group that had already been assembled prior to the CGSA application process called the KCAE, and that was the original coalition that developed the vision for education in Kentucky. The CGSA application built on their original work, and so we built in feedback loops to them throughout the writing process, and so that was something that we were trying to take advantage of, that the creation of that coalition. So we identified, you can see here, the first thing here is that we identified a writing team. Those letters represent people. And then we identified a reviewer and feedback team, and each of those letters represents a person as well. And so we just walked through the process of when would we need to finish recruiting a team? When would we have an initial meeting? What were some of the big things that we would try to talk through at that initial meeting? So identifying the things that we would need to learn, the things that we need to write, who would be the small group that would be responsible for each of those chunks of the application. You can see here that we put in the benchmark of submitting the intent to apply letter here. And then throughout the process, we tried to say, like, when are we going to outline, when are we going to hit some key benchmarks, key timelines, and key activities. So we established some clear times when we would do work together, and when we would communicate out back to this KCAE. So we tried to build in a process where we would loop back to that original coalition to get their feedback and thoughts. There was a writing team that would share back to that reviewing group, and so we set up times for those groups to meet and do that sharing and feedback process. And then you can see here that there was a moment when we knew that we would want to share it with the commissioner in order to sort of keep the commissioner up to speed about the progress of the work. The team established a moment when we would review the finalized draft, when it would be sent to the KCAE once again for sort of their final review and feedback, and then when it would be announced at the state board meeting in order to acknowledge that the grant was sort of going out the door. There's a moment here at that same time when we were trying to name that we would do some legal review internally. That's something that probably should be named more clearly here. So for in this time period, so that the grants office and the legal would be able to review this, but that was sort of implied by a lot of this internal process. Let me pause here and just see if there's any questions about this. And none of this is gospel. You can feel free to edit it and change it to match your local context, your local structures and systems, but we just wanted to present a writing process and timeline that you could consider, so you're not starting from scratch. Questions?
Hey, Danny, could you talk a little bit about the roles of the individuals that were on your various teams, just kind of at a high level, whether they represented certain, places within the department, or if they were part of CIE or other organizations? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thanks. And we'll talk a little bit more later about the specific sort of ways of thinking about composing a team, but at a high level, there were a lot of partners in the Kentucky process, and anybody else who was involved. I mean, a lot of us were involved at that time. Feel free to pipe in, but there were essentially a department person from a specific, so like the Office of Accountability, for example, assessment accountability, had a person. And then there was also often an external partner, for example, in this case, like from the Center for Assessment, who would be conferring with one another and discussing how they were going to complete a certain section. So that was often how the writing teams sort of formed up.
Donnie, in that case, did we have any people who were like there were KCAE was this big advisory group in the state that was sort of the run up to being ready for CGSA in Kentucky. That included like family members, that included superintendents, that included community leaders. Were they mostly in the like advising review role, that group of people, or did any of them opt into the to the heavier lift of contributing to writing?
Yeah, they were a great question. They were mostly involved with those like review moments where we said we're going to go back to the KCAE. And we would prepare, we had a series of slide decks that we used to sort of share the high level outline of, because getting in the weeds of like the document would be a lot. And so it would force us actually to get to a good synthesis of where we were and the kind of big ideas, which actually ultimately helped with the writing too.
Thanks.
Cool. Any other questions about this? Suggestions? Things that you're thinking of?
I'm thinking about how I've already had some conversations with our assistant commissioner for accountability, who also houses our assessment group. But really, this would have to also go before Stacy, the deputy, just to see, you know, where she might land on this. And if she saw this as an opportunity, if there were any preferences within the scope of what she's thinking about that might be, you know, important to address, you know, or to be mindful of during this. So it's helping me to think about that balance between who would we involve from the field and how would we make sure we were working with the right people so that this gets the movement it needs and the support it needs at the top, but also pulling from those who we know would be interested in this sort of thing from the field, keeping that balance.
Yeah, so that's a great lead in actually into the next part of the discussion. There's the how that this process represents, and it's really closely tied to the question of who, right? Who is part of this work? Hey, Allison, it's great to see you.
Hey, Donnie.
We gave you a shout out earlier for helping inspire a lot of this work, and so thank you. And we're thrilled to have you here. We are just walking through some of like process documents and some ideas around how to structure the writing process, which really culminates, I think, in the concept paper process concept paper idea that you had shared with us a few calls ago. And so actually with this question of how and who, I'm going to hand it over to Rita to talk about that who part.
Thanks, Donnie. And thanks, Denise. Donnie's correct. You already, some of the questions that we want to share with you to think about, that's in a beautiful way. I think it's great when the questions come from you. Can we have the next slide, please? So in practical terms, we just want you to think about how you build your CGSA writing team. And the first question that you should ask is, who are the folks that have to be included? And that may include those assessment folks, the assessment director of that team, your technical experts, which may come from within your department, and they may be some of our technical assistance partners and such, and then your legal team. There may be other folks that you have to include. And I think the question that all of you have posed, which is not listed here as a group, but if we're building with the field and not like imposing something on the field, and if we're scaling beyond those folks who are our sort of leaders in this, how do we engage the field in the process? It may not be in the immediate writing team, but how do we consult with them in ways that help us build our CGSA applications for a broader audience? And I think as part of that, after you figure out your who, and I'm going to start off and then Jenny's going to jump in. But the question then, I have my who. What are some of the roles that have to be considered when doing that writing? Who is doing the immediate writing? Who's doing the body of it? Who needs to review or weigh in and at what points? And that can be those folks that have to be there, but that can also be the field. And so how do we think about that? And who needs to sign off when and for what steps? And that'll also influence your project plan as you're thinking about when each step needs to be done. And Jenny, I'm going to pass it over to you to sort of think about how we can lay out some of those roles in really clear ways.
Awesome. So we have another tool for you to feel free to download and adapt to fit your needs and your context. And I'm going to ask Lauren to go ahead and pull it up. And we'll post also the link in the chat. So this tool is kind of just meant to help you think through the different types of folks that you might want to engage and in what capacity. And so there's kind of a table below that lists all different types of folks that you may want to consider engaging in some way, whether they're actually responsible for writing as part of the writing team, or there's someone who you will need to seek their formal sign off or approval at some point, or perhaps they're what we call a consultant here, not like a formal like consultant, but somebody whose input or feedback you need to consult along the way. And then there's a fourth category that's just informed, someone that you're keeping in the know, but that you're not actually asking anything specific from them at this point. And so as you kind of go down the table, there's, we brainstormed all different kinds of folks, but you will likely have others in your own context. But there's a few different, state education agency folks, like your assessment department, perhaps accountability department, likely other departments, especially if you're doing something related to personalized learning or some of the work that you're leading already. At some point, you'll probably want to think about when and how to include the top brass of the SEA, so the chief or deputy, State Board of Education. Intermediary organizations or other implementation partners, there might be a bunch of them here, so it's not meant to be limited to just one person. Technical experts and vendors, district superintendents, if you're really doing some, co-creation with the field along the way, higher ed partners, network leaders, other field partners, as well as advocacy organizations and stakeholder groups. So the idea behind this table is just to spark some thinking about what types of folks you need to engage, who specifically you might engage in each of those roles, what role they would play in the writing of the application. You don't have to think about what role would they play, if you were awarded. This is really just like in the writing process. And then there's space for you to put some notes about how they would be engaged in the writing process. Like, is there a specific task or a phase that they would be engaged in, or a checkpoint along the way? So feel free to download this and use it as you see fit. And then if we go back to the slide deck, to the next slide. So the document that I just talked us through is, again, it's at a high level of who are the types of folks and how much you want to engage them. At some point, it may feel useful to you to actually go into a little bit more depth, task by task. You'll see actually a little bit of that in the project plan that Donnie had shared, but there are some project management frameworks out there. RACI is one of them that we had adapted for that project planning tool, but where you would now take the different folks in the different roles and specify their role task by task. On the next slide is perhaps even more involved project management tool called MOCA, stands for Manager, Owner, Consulted, Helper, and Approver. And again, the idea is you could take all those different team members and specify their roles based on individual tasks. That way you can monitor the progress of the work as you go along. So we list those for your, in case they're useful to you, please feel free to grab something and adapt it to your needs. So I am going to pass it back, I think, to Donnie.
Sure. And Malachi, I saw you come off mute. Did you?
Yeah. I just had a question. I'm curious about just like the Kentucky work, because if I remember correctly, the state agency has to be the one that is like technically applying. However, like it seems like a lot of pieces. And so like in the Kentucky work, like who was the owner? Like who, even though the state agency was the one that applied, like where did the buck stop? Was there an organization? Or was there kind of one person that kind of said the buck stops with me? I'm just curious about just the general management of everybody and all the partners?
Yeah, it's a super good question. Actually, it's a perfect lead into actually what I wanted to share real quick is I don't think we have a prescription as to how this process has to move forward and what inclusivity and co-creation has to look like. That because actually you have two really good examples here. So I think, and Allison, please correct me if I'm wrong, that New York had like a relatively small writing sort of core team, and then a paid grant writer, and then there was a lot of consultation, right, with lots of different teams that core team really took responsibility for. Is that right, Allison?
Yes, that's exactly right.
Cool. And as long as there's clarity on that, that's obviously a valid and effective approach. In Kentucky, there was a much larger writing and there was a small group of us that played like kind of a herding cats role. Some might have considered me the chief cat herder, but you're right in that ultimately, the department had to be like, this is our application. That wasn't something that I could do, but there was along the way enough checkpoints between the writing group and the department to feel like, okay, we're comfortable with what this is proposing, and that co-creation process, as long as there's enough clarity around like who's writing, who's reading, who's considering, and then ultimately who's approving, then it can work. But it can be messier than having like a small core team. Paul, you want to add something?
Yeah, I just add contextually in Kentucky, the then chief Jason Glass appointed a person to lead the grant, but it was clear in their discussions that he was not going to be able to put the grant together in the very short time frame, and so brought CIE and a number of the other partners in, so that it was a more inclusive process, but also to provide capacity. But the centrality, if you will, of the chief and that appointed person, who was David Cook at the time, that was the lead person from the department's standpoint. So they felt comfortable that they had a controlling interest in the work.
Absolutely.
And I would just add, the two that I've been involved with Arkansas have been multi-state, and they have had an organization that has acted like as the project manager to keep the cohesion among the states, while the states also kind of have their own. There was a central problem that they were trying to solve, or a question they were trying to answer, but it looked a little different in the different states. But in the case of both of these, there were two separate organizations that kind of acted as the glue that kept the problem in the forefront, and then the states, kind of agreed to, these are the actions we're going to take collectively versus these are the things we're going to do individually. So that's another way that I've seen it that has been interesting.
Yeah, and not to put too fine of a point on it, we think that those of you who are close to the work, close to the ground, close to these organizations, are best positioned to figure out the right who, the right how, the right whens. We want to present these tools as ways of thinking through that in order to provide the clarity that actually engenders the right level of trust and the gathering of the insights from all of these different perspectives. Sometimes we say that clarity is a gift that you give yourself and others, and so if you can really name this process and name the who's and name like how each of them is going to be involved in the right ways, those are locally contextualized conversations and discussions and processes that you have to really think through. But we hope that this learning group is a place where you can think through that with our help and with our support collectively. So on the next slide, we wanted to just prompt a little bit of that initial thinking, thoughts, questions, hopes. What are your initial thoughts about the project that you're considering? And are there any hopes that you have about what you want from this time together. And then any additional questions, we've already been surfacing some about team or the initial planning process.